Can you tell us a bit more about Project Pegasus?
Sure. I've talked a lot tonight about the fact that when I was a child, the U.S. government was in possession of information about the fact that 40 years hence I would discover life on Mars and write about it in my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, and play a role as a figure in the disclosure movement in a broader sense. And I mentioned this phrase quantum access, and I realize that I haven't really described for you what I mean by that and what the U.S. government had achieved by around 1970 as a result of its secret technical activities. Project Pegasus was a classified research and development program that was undertaken beginning in the late 1960s under the aegis of DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And when I first became associated with it, it was then known as ARPA. And at various times in its history, it's been known as either DARPA or ARPA. So when I say DARPA, I'm also mindful of the fact that some of the time when I was on the project, it was called ARPA, like when we were trained about what the function of DARPA was. DARPA is essentially the modern successor agency of research and development activities in the United States that actually began during the Revolutionary War, when General George Washington commanded a group of scientists to develop for him and for the Revolutionary Army a more effective form of gunpowder. So DARPA is ultimately the modern successor agency to that effort that's been undertaken by the U.S. military for 230 years since the Revolution to basically give the U.S. military more sophisticated technology of one sort or the other. Initially, it was obviously more sophisticated weaponry, but then especially during the 20th century, it also evolved into efforts to give the U.S. military and what would become the U.S. intelligence community after World War II more effective technology to gather information. So fundamentally, what Project Pegasus was commissioned to do was to give the U.S. president and the U.S. executive branch, broadly defined, to include not just the military but the intelligence community, greater capabilities in an area that they were calling remote sensing in time. In fact, when I was attached to Project Pegasus, I read a mimeographed DARPA technical paper called Remote Sensing in Time. Well, what did they mean? What they meant was giving the U.S. intelligence community access to information that's stored in the past and in the future. Now, this was going to be achieved through different forms of what I'm calling quantum access. And that quantum access ran the gamut of everything from conventional remote viewing by gifted psychics all the way to physical time travel to the past and the future. And when I was attached to Project Pegasus as a child, beginning in the fall of 1969 and ending in the summer of 1972, I was engaged in everything from performing remote viewing for the U.S. military to being physically spun so that I would go out of body and view things, to sitting in a device called the Montauk chair, which was a magnetic resonator that boosted human consciousness so that the psychic sitting in the chair perceived events occurring in his or her own future that one could then be questioned about to determine what the future held. And also two very advanced technologies, including teleportation and chronovision. Now, these two technical components were really the ultimate thrust of Pegasus during the time that I was attached to the project. The teleport device was found in the papers that Nikola Tesla, the brilliant Serbian-born immigrant inventor, left at the time of his death in January of 1943. We can even find in conventional biographies of Tesla, for example, Margaret Cheney's book about Nikola Tesla, that at the time of his death, there were two teams that were sent out to get his papers. One was a team of two FBI agents, and the other was a team of 2 officers from the War Department, which after World War II would become the U.S. Defense Department. The War Department agents got there first, and there's been a mythology that has emerged about Tesla and the fact that his papers were lost after that time. That is not the case. The War Department, in fact, forwarded Tesla's papers to the internationally renowned physicists that were then gathering in Los Alamos, New Mexico, to build the atomic bomb. At that time, a laboratory was created that was originally called the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory, and then later it was renamed the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Tesla's papers were sent there because if anybody on the planet was going to be able to help the U.S. War Department figure out what Tesla meant by these very arcane drawings and mostly technical specifications and mathematical formulae that he included with his papers, it would be the brilliant physicists then gathering in New Mexico to build the atomic bomb. His papers were never lost, and in fact, they remain at Los Alamos. In fact, during my investigation over the last decade, I in fact found that they're still there and that you need a special security clearance just to be able to read them. Okay, so after World War II, there was an effort to figure out what all the different devices and schematics and drawings of technical devices and mathematical formulae and so forth that were found in Tesla's papers and that were being held at Los Alamos did. I mean, what were they intended by Tesla to create? Tesla had been alleged to just have sort of fallen apart during the last 15 years of his life and just supposedly was just consumed raising pigeons. In fact, he was in a feverish state of intellectual activity, and he essentially devised basically the shape of things to come, the technology of the 21st century. So there was an effort after World War II under DARPA to build prototypes of the devices that Tesla had left in his papers at the time of his death and figure out what they did. What was he inventing? One of these devices was an object that consisted of 2 parentheses-shaped armatures that when they were set up in a room in Building 68 at the old Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Facility, because Curtiss-Wright had been a kind of a laboratory for development, for research and development activities during and after World War II. There were multiple numbered buildings there where all manner of different defense projects were underway. And so in one of these buildings, they set up one of the Tesla devices, and all they could understand is that when they turned the device on, an energy field was generated between the 2 armatures of the device. The armatures looked almost like large stereo speakers or the radar booms on a U.S. naval ship. They were parenthesis-shaped and painted gray in color, and they were about 8 feet high on a kind of a stand. And the stand was recessed into the base of the object so it could sit on the ground in a completely freestanding way, like a stereo speaker. And when the device was turned on, this energy field was propagated between the 2 booms of the device. Let me describe what it looked like. If you stood about 10 feet away from the device, the energy field looked like water gently falling in a public fountain, kind of like a water sculpture in a metropolitan park. But if you stood up about a foot away from the energy field, it looked like raster on a TV set, basically a black and white snow pattern. And you could see that at 3-inch intervals on the concave edge of the device were these little portals of blue-green light that were causing squiggles to emanate across the field of the raster, across the pattern. In fact, they were more like the green running lights on computers, and as this light was projected